we had lost so many guys over the course of a 7-month deployment. And this was our entire, like, you know, kind of get right with yourself brief. And the chaplain walked in and said, let's list all the names of all the guys that died. So we listed all the names of all the guys that died, and that was it. And he was like, okay, class over. Like, hope everybody's okay. Like, remember that they served. Like, we didn't know how to deal with that because we're all coming back from it, and everybody was just kind of, everybody just wanted to go home and drink booze. And, you know, as soon as we got home and people started drinking booze, you started seeing emotions coming out. And it was, you know, guys were getting drunk, help me included. Like, we were getting drunk, and you'd be at a bar and just start crying. And you're with a guy or two and you're telling stories, and next thing you know, you're crying.
My name's Brian Morrison. I'm the director of Bastards Road. It's a documentary about a Marine veteran that walked about 6,000 miles around the country to kind of face his traumatic memories from war.
How did you and John hook up? How did you guys first meet?
So John and I went to high school together, but we didn't know each other. We had mutual friends. My wife knew him. My next door neighbor was actually his closest friend growing up. And he had already embarked on the journey. He walked about 16 to 1,800 miles before I knew what he was doing. Wow. He would pop up on my Facebook feeds. He got on little like local news stations. And so I saw him and then reached out to some of our friends. They were like, what is John doing? I knew that it was around related to PTSD and bringing awareness to veteran issues. But you know, in those little like news clips and the newspaper articles, like you just get a cursory overview of what's going on and who he is. And I just thought, man, if nobody's doing something, I don't know, I was just so like attracted and compelled. And so my next door neighbor put us in touch, and just slowly, you know, John and I kind of figured out that him and I, you know, it might work. Yeah. And
did you have to earn his trust first? Was he receptive to the idea, or did he have some apprehension?
So you know, like he's walking to raise awareness in some way.
Yeah.
And him discovering what a healing process it was gonna be for him kind of came later.
Yeah.
So he had the desire to talk and to get that story out. So but it was trust, and that evolved very slowly. But you know, on the phone and figuring out. But he actually came home to Maryland for a VA appointment. So he took a quick hiatus from the trip to fly back, do this appointment, and then fly back and continue on his way. And so his parents lived not even a mile from me. And so we did an interview, and we felt each other out. We talked for like 2 hours. It was fantastic. And the first trip out was, I mean, our trust, it just kind of happened naturally. And you know, we became very, very close friends and connected very deeply over the course of everything.
Part of a documentarian's not responsibility, but idea is, you know, showing the people, you know, you want to bring light to this issue. You want to make sure that you're doing everything for the right reasons. But there is a lot of traumatic things that they taught, that you uncover and discover throughout this process. And some things that are very personal that don't really relate to the idea of what he's doing, but has an effect on who he is and what he was doing. So, how did you reconcile that in the editing process? Were you looking at that and going, you know, it adds to his personal story, or was it more of, you know, you had a hard time, you know, was it the last thing you were going to cut, or how did you look at that aspect of this journey for him?
So his journey kind of, it became evident that it was almost two different things. It was him on the road alone, that isolation, and him kind of attacking those traumatic memories of his with nothing else around.
Yeah.
And nothing but his own thoughts, which is you can imagine a really scary and brave, courageous thing to do.
Absolutely.
But
just for a normal person.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Whatever your trauma is. But when John met with his brothers, with his Marine brothers, it kind of all changed for me. How they let me enter their world, and that trust that John and them had together, and that support and that bond and that love, and how it almost kind of transcended to me. And I thought that was so beautiful and moving that they would talk to me. I mean, I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't going to go in and just say, like, hey, let's talk about your trauma from war. I don't know you.
Right.
But because John and I had developed such a deep relationship, some of these guys had talked to me where they had not talked to anybody about these things outside maybe a close family member like a mom or a dad or some of their Marine brothers. So it's just this random civilian that comes into the world. It was tremendously courageous of them to do that. And it was all stemmed from that love, loyalty, and trust that they have with each other in that Marine world.
What did you learn as a filmmaker as you started this process and that you're going to take into the next film that you do?
You know, I just came into the process not entirely with an empty, clean slate, but I wanted to know John and learn about him as a person. And everything else came later. It felt like it was a movie about PTSD at the beginning, and it just it kind of unraveled that.
Right.
And then in some ways it came back and reared its head again, but then it became something else. And I think what's so, the hopefulness of John's story is just what I think can really connect and bridge the civilian audience to the veteran world. Because veterans know this is going on. They don't need to see another movie about PTSD and trauma from war. They get that. They know that they've lived it.
Yeah.
And civilians know that for a big reason too. But in the way that they open up and they talk about the other components of survivor's guilt, moral injuries, if you will, and the PTSD and what it looks like coming home, and to have a society that's more ready to listen and to be accepting and not necessarily have any answers, but just to be an ear, to have some level of trust or a welcoming community where they can share their stories without the risk of being judged.
Yeah.
That's what we all want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. So what do you love about being an indie filmmaker? What did you cherish about this process?
Well, this is my first project. This is my first real project. So I tell you, it sparked a love of the documentary film format or whatever you will. But I've really fallen in love deep with this process, and I feel blessed to be the one to tell John's story and to bring that to the world. And yeah, it means a lot to be here right now.
Nice. Have you screened in front of some Marines and other troops and some younger troops that maybe haven't, or maybe about to be deployed, or because this could be an educational film as much as anything else?
Oh,
right?
absolutely. So we very much intend this film to reach a lot of different channels and networks about reaching the people that need them.
Yeah.
There's some veterans that need to hear that story to share things because they fear they're going to be judged. Yeah. But at some point,
not only that, but to not feel alone.
Right, and not feel alone. I mean, you're talking. We have a big country, so those Marines, those combat veterans, when you get out, like, you lose that support network. Yeah. The strongest support network you have is those guys that you serve with in the same dirt. So it's just like the rug gets pulled out from these guys. But also, as much for them to kind of take something from John's kind of bravery, to just put yourself out, take that first step. You might need to walk 6,000 miles, but take that first step to hopefully find somebody that's willing to just listen. And hopefully that happens for can inspire civilians again to be receptive without judgment, and for veterans to maybe find that strength they have. Like, they're not these like weak, victimized people. They are those strong individuals that can, they were operating at the highest level of a human can do when you're in combat. So I mean, I understand it's a big deflating thing to come home, but like, we just are. It's just such a huge honor to be around them. Sure. And I think they need to hear that from civilians, of how much we do appreciate and admire that strength that they still have. Because it's an everyday thing. PTSD for anybody, whether you're a combat vet or it's a domestic thing.
There's no cure. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, it doesn't go away. But it's a natural thing.
Yeah.
And shoving pills down your bottle, getting shoved a whole bunch of pills, might not necessarily be the best way. But just open yourself up to talking and expressing yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's what we hope. It's just open conversations about different forms of kind of natural treatment. And it's really the very beginning. John is like, just take those first steps.
Yeah.
And John had to take 6,000 steps. So it's and he's incredibly insightful, and for a guy like that to put himself open, out there like that, it just I'm really excited for people to get to listen to his story.
I'm Mark Stafford. I am the writer and producer of the film, so I did all of the narrative arrangement of the footage. I was involved with Brian right from the beginning, but he shot the film and he was out there doing all that stuff. And when he brought back all the footage, that's when I started to get heavily involved. Nice.
When you look at everything that he captured and covered, and the scope in which this became a reality, what were you left with initially as the person putting it together and arranging it, that you felt like this was going to be something special?
I can tell you actually from the very beginning when I met John, we had done maybe a couple interviews, but not much. And it was such an immediate connection. He's such a unique personality.
Yeah, he seems
he's a Marine through and through,
right.
No doubt. But he's so smart, so just a kind-souled, big-hearted, louder-than-life guy. And so it was an immediate connection. And even right then, I kind of felt like, man, if we can really capture him, we will have something special. But, when Brian and I, when we cut it together, it took a while.
Yeah.
Finding that consciousness of the film, it's always a tricky thing. But I felt like, when we had a really long cut at one point a couple years ago, I knew it could be special. And it took a long time to get here, but I think at that time I really knew it could be. Yeah.
The funny thing about documentaries is that you go into the mindset knowing you're going to do one thing, and then it completely changes on you, whether during the filming, during the editing process. So talk about the evolution of this film, like you were just talking about a little bit, how it changed and how it evolved for you, and how you decided on what you were going to tell in this story.
Yeah, so I can give you a really good example. We, like I was just saying, a couple years ago, we had about a 2.5-hour cut. And actually, we, on Memorial Day a few years ago, we went down to Florida because one of the families of the sons that was killed overseas that John served with, they were having a big party that they have every year for him. And we went down there just to hang out, and we actually did a screening of that long cut just to be with the guys, got close to them. And we just got, we had never really watched it with a crowd, and it totally changed us. And what we ended up doing that we didn't know we were going to do, we actually ended up doing a ton of interviews that weekend.
Nice.
And then we cut a bunch of the film and then used a ton of that footage, and it completely evolved the narrative. We got some of the best stuff that weekend.
Oh, interesting.
And, that really changed the game for us. And then there were a couple other moments where we just radically changed the beginning of the film or the end, or, we moved stuff around. So, yeah, it's a long process. It's two guys in a dark room yelling at each other for 2 years. That's what it is, man. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, that being said, what do you love about being an indie filmmaker? What is it that you cherish about the process?
Man, we this is our first feature, but Brian and I both really love human stories.
Yeah.
And honestly, I just feel like it's one of the biggest blessings in my life to get to know John, because, I grew up a military brat, but I didn't serve, and I don't think I would have ever got to meet somebody like him. And I just feel like I got this gift in my life, like getting to meet him, and then because of John trusting Brian, I got to meet all these other amazing guys. And to be honest, even after all the cool stuff, that still feels like the biggest blessing.
My name's Daniel Strauch, or Stan Drought is my artist name. I worked on some of the original composition for the film with Mike.
Yep, and my name is Michael Marx Gibbons, and I engineered a lot of it and got to play some violin on the piece. It's great.
The music is so important at moments of silence in this film where you feel that loneliness and you feel that journey. Talk about how you guys worked within that framework and what inspired you. Was it that idea that, you know, you're looking at somebody taking this journey, or was it just trying to find the right tone? How did you guys manage to do that?
So I think there were a lot of really unique things that happened. First being when we got involved in this project, actually when Brian kind of showed it to me, even before I became a composer on the film, I got to learn a lot about John, right? So that was a really important thing to understand the dynamic of the film, the relationship between Brian and John and what John was doing. Then on top of that, me being a civilian, I brought in an engineer who is an Army vet, right? Nice. So like there was just this incredible energy to where when it came to write about it, and even, you know, from the lyrics to the composition to whatever, it felt really organic. And I think in this type of film that is vital, because if it doesn't feel like that way, or even if you're taking, you know, our goal was to not interrupt the film, right? To service it, and I think honestly, like it happened, it was a great experience. Nice. And as a creative and, you know, somebody who works in the music industry, my dream is to be a part of stuff like this. Stuff that makes a difference. Writing music is great. Being involved in projects are great. But when you can see this elevate to another level in terms of changing people's lives, that's it. Nice. I mean, I've cried during this film a number of times, and I was
both did.
Right. Yes. So I think, and just watching people's genuine reactions to it, it's like, holy shit, this can really do something. So like, we're champions of it, and we're blessed to be a part of it. Brian, Mark, they just did an incredible job. And John is he's a unique soul. He's one of the only people that can carry something like this. I shouldn't say one of the only. He just did a really good job of doing something that is really hard to do. Sure.
So, you know, as a musician, having that emotional crutch, you know, as so to speak, really, I would imagine enhances your experience.
Huge. Oh man, the songwriting was such a unique thing because a few hours into the session, like we had goosebumps. We're like, dude, this is working. And it never felt forced, and you just, you know, you never know how it's going to go. And then when you're finished it and you feel great about it, you still have to show the team. And you're waiting for that feedback, understanding that if they don't like it, you have to move on and keep going. And lucky for us, and it was never received that way. And I think the team got involved, and it was such I'm a very emotional human being. So attaching yourself to an emotional film can do one of two things. You can go in the wrong direction, the right direction. And lucky for us, it worked.
Nice. So. It does really well. As the engineer, putting this in places that you know are going to be effective, how much did you think about? Did it change for you? Did you variable it a little bit, or did you know exactly where the music was going to go?
It's a great question. So my number one goal with this was to not let the film down. As you know, as a veteran myself, having gotten to know John and you know all his fellow Marines, and having served in the same time period, I was petrified of letting this film down in some way because the message is so important. From an engineering standpoint, it was pretty straightforward. But getting to work hand in hand with Brian, the director, and Dan, who are just amazing creatives. My job was too easy on it, and, you know, and I got to play violin on it, which is like my secret passion.
He's underselling himself. He's an incredible musician too.
So just to be able to be a part of the project, I mean, it blew me away. Brian brought me on a couple of years prior, while he was actually still in the filming process of this. Being a veteran, he was asking my opinion on, you know, what should we kind of tackle. And so when Dan reached out to me to do the music part, where do I sign up?
Nice. So, what do you guys love about working in the indie film world? What was it that you really you just embraced?
To be honest with you, it's the relationships that you build meeting other independent film creatives. Because it's most people's life's work. Right? Like there's no agenda. Like you're here showing off all of your vulnerability. And like that has more power and connectivity to me than anything. Like I like just to meet somebody who worked on a film in a completely different capacity that they spent the last half decade of their life working on
from another country.
Right. And having that conversation, I mean, I'm literally getting chills because that's the creative community. That's something you can't pay for. You can't. And the beauty of film festivals is they organically make that happen. You know, especially independent films. Like that, there's so much power. I mean, we see the independent movies.
voices made to be heard.
Right? The independent movement is real and it's happening, and places like Slamdance give such an incredible platform for independent artists to be showcased.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen what's come out of this place. So just to be a part of it is cool.
That's
exciting.
awesome.
So
How do you feel about it?
Oh, so we just came from Santa Barbara International Film Festival,
Yeah.
and
Congratulations, by the way.
Oh,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much. To meet people from different countries that don't know American culture, and then want to introduce their culture to us, and have these are stories that need to be told.
Yeah.
And the fact that a lot of these stories will never get seen by the mainstream, it's unfortunate to us, and that's why you should go to these types of festivals, because you can see these stories from all different walks of life and all different forms of perspective. So, yeah, I'm so humbled to be here and excited to be.
Combat, I'll take that last little piece, that piece that you thought the world is kind of an okay place. Combat takes that from you, and you'll never get that back.
They lose part of themselves when they go to war, and we just hope that we can help them get all those pieces and parts back together.
A Maryland man has been walking across the country since last year.
9,000 kilometers, 5,800 miles? That's a lot of lonely road out there.
Once you're home, you think it's over. It's just beginning.
You go off to war and you're going to be asked to do unspeakable things. To think that you just went over and did your job, that's pretty ignorant.
I don't think we're looked at as patriots or heroes. I think we're looked at as damaged goods.
Most people, they look at PTSD and they see weakness. It's a survival mechanism. It's what the situations that we were in over there demanded us to behave in a different way.
No one else knows what we went through but them. Not being able to see these guys or not knowing how they're doing, you tend to lose it. It's hard to communicate.
I was very angry very quickly. And I didn't have any control over where my mind was going or what I was thinking about, and I couldn't stop them from happening.
When John comes, he carries the grief too, but it's like, I'm not the only one. Like, I can share it with him.
These are strong individuals. They're not victims. They're survivors.